Echo chamber. A horror story. First thing Daniel Reeves noticed about Hollow Mountain was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of a peaceful countryside, or the muffled quiet of a snow-covered forest, but a thick, oppressive absence of sound that seemed to swallow everything. Even the crunch of his boots on the gravel path leading to the Sao cave entrance felt somehow distant, as if the sound was being absorbed by the very air around him. Daniel adjusted the heavy equipment bag on his shoulder, its weight a comforting reminder of why he was here. As one of the leading acoustic engineers at Resonance Research Labs, he had been sent to this remote cave system to test their new ultra-sensitive recording equipment. Hollow Mountain was famous among sound engineers for its unique acoustic properties: caverns that could produce echoes lasting up to 45 seconds, natural amphitheaters with perfect sound reflection, and passages that created harmonic resonances at specific frequencies. It was the perfect testing ground for the prototype he carried, the Echo X system, designed to capture sounds beyond the normal human hearing range and analyze acoustic environments with unprecedented precision. The military applications alone had secured their funding for the next 5 years. A cool breeze brushed past him from the cave entrance, carrying that distinctive earthy smell of limestone and dampness. Daniel shivered slightly, though not entirely from the cold. There was something about caves that had always unnerved him. The darkness, perhaps, or the weight of stone above, or the way sound behaved differently. Underground. Strange how he'd ended up in a career that frequently sent him into them. Just 3 days, he muttered to himself. Set up the equipment, run the tests, collect the data, and get back to civilization. The small base camp the company had arranged was already set up just inside the cave entrance, a weatherproof tent with a cot, portable table with equipment charging stations, and supplies to last a week. The deeper testing sites had been marked on his map by the speleologists who had surveyed the system last month. Daniel took one last look at the sky, a perfect blue with wisps of cirrus clouds, before entering the mouth of the cave. The transition from natural light to the beam of his headlamp was abrupt, the darkness ahead thick and absolute. He set to work efficiently, unpacking his equipment and checking each component. The Echo X system consisted of several high-sensitivity microphones designed to be placed throughout the cave, a central processing unit, specialized headphones, and a tablet for controlling the system and reviewing recordings. All state-of-the-art, most of it still technically classified. By late afternoon, Daniel had mapped out his initial testing locations and set up the first array of microphones in what the survey team had labeled Chamber A, about half a mile into the cave system. It was a perfect starting point, a roughly spherical cavern about 40 feet in diameter with multiple smaller passages branching off, creating complex acoustic interactions. He activated the system, watching as the tablet screen displayed the incoming audio spectrum in real time, mostly flat, with occasional low-frequency rumbles from distant water movement and the barely perceptible high-frequency signals of bats much deeper in the system. Beginning baseline test 1, Daniel spoke clearly, watching the sound wave of his voice appear on the screen. He clapped his hands 3 times, the sharp echoes repeating and fading in a textbook example of acoustic decay. The data looked perfect. He ran through several more standard tests: frequency sweeps, tonal response measurements, and ambient recording baselines. Everything was working exactly as expected. As the natural light from the cave entrance faded with the setting sun, Daniel returned to his base camp, connected the Echo X to his laptop, and began processing the day's recordings for his initial report. The headphones engulfed his ears, creating a perfect seal for critical listening. He started with the baseline ambient recording, 10 minutes of the empty chamber, captured with gain levels high enough to pick up sounds well below normal human hearing threshold. Standard procedure was to listen through once in real time before running the automated analysis. For the first few minutes, it was exactly what he expected. The subtle sounds of water dripping somewhere in the distance, the gentle movement of air through the passages, the occasional settling of microscopic particles of dust. The Echo X was performing beautifully, capturing details that no commercial recording equipment could match. Then, at approximately 6:34 into the recording, something changed. Daniel's finger moved to the playback slider, dragging it back 30 seconds. He increased the volume and listened again. There, a voice. Distant and barely audible, but unmistakably human. He frowned, removing his headphones and looking around the empty cave entrance. He was at least a mile from the nearest road, and the property surrounding Hollow Mountain was private land owned by the Research Foundation. There shouldn't be anyone else here. Maybe it was radio interference. The Echo X was designed to filter that out, but any prototype could have bugs. Or perhaps the cave had its own version of paranormal sounds, air moving through tight passages creating frequencies that sounded like voices, a phenomenon documented in other cave systems. Daniel put the headphones back on and isolated that section of audio, applying filters to enhance vocal frequencies. The voice became clearer, though still distant. Is anyone... Daniel checked the spectrogram of the recording, looking for signs of tampering or external file insertion. Everything appeared legitimate. These sounds had been captured by his microphones in Chamber A during the night. With growing dread, he moved to the final flagged section near the end of the recording. He hesitated before pressing play, then steeled himself and listened. The first voice he heard was his own. "Oh God, please, somebody help me. It's in here with me, I can't..." His voice cut off with a choked scream. Daniel threw the headphones across the table, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. That was impossible. That was his voice, his exact voice. But he had never said those words. Never screamed like that. He needed to call someone, to get out of this cave right now. He grabbed his satellite phone, but the display showed no signal, despite being near the cave entrance. He moved outside, but the status remained unchanged. That was wrong. They had specifically tested connectivity at the entrance before approving this location. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Daniel had a choice: try to hike out in the dark through unfamiliar forest terrain, or spend one more night and leave at first light. The nearest road was over 3 miles away through dense woodland. Reluctantly, he decided to wait until morning. He couldn't abandon the expensive research equipment, and night, hiking without proper preparation was dangerous. Whatever was happening with the recordings, technical glitch, elaborate prank, or something he couldn't yet explain, he could handle one more night. He would sleep with his packed gear ready for immediate departure at dawn. That night, Daniel didn't even attempt to sleep. He sat with his back against the cave wall, flashlight and knife, within reach, listening to every sound. The cave remained eerily silent, which somehow felt worse than if he had actually heard voices. At some point, despite his determination to stay awake, exhaustion claimed him. Day 3. Daniel jolted awake, confused and disoriented. Darkness surrounded him, but not the darkness of the cave entrance where he had been sitting. His headlamp was off and he couldn't feel the cave wall against his back anymore. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers finding only rough stone floor. Panic surged as he patted the ground around him, finally locating the light several feet away. When he switched it on, the beam revealed unfamiliar surroundings, a narrow passage with glistening wet walls. This wasn't the cave entrance. This wasn't anywhere near his camp. Daniel scrambled to his feet, searching for any landmark he recognized. Nothing. He checked his pockets. He had his knife, his watch, and the tablet with the Echo X control interface, but his phone and GPS unit were missing. His watch showed 3:17 a.m. He had been asleep or unconscious for hours. But how had he gotten here? Sleepwalking seemed impossible given the rough terrain of the cave system. The tablet still had power. He activated its mapping function, which was supposed to show the locations of all deployed microphones, but the screen displayed only static. No GPS coordinates, no map overlay, nothing useful. He had 2 options: stay put, and hope someone would come looking when he failed to check in, or try to find his way back. Neither seemed particularly promising, but staying in this unknown section of cave felt wrong, like waiting for a predator to find its cornered prey. Daniel decided to move. The passage he was in had to connect back to the main system eventually. He examined the floor for any signs of his own footprints, any indication of how he had arrived here. but the ground was mostly solid rock with no tracks visible. He chose a direction that seemed to slope slightly upward, reasoning that it might lead toward the surface. As he walked, he periodically called out, his voice echoing down the passageways. The echoes sounded wrong, somehow, lasting too long and seeming to change subtly as they repeated. After what felt like an hour, though his watch showed only 20 minutes had passed, Daniel reached a fork in the passage. With no way to determine which path was correct, he chose the right branch because it appeared slightly wider. The tablet in his pocket suddenly emitted a soft tone. He pulled it out to find the EchoX interface active, showing an audio waveform. The system was recording, though he hadn't activated it. A chill ran through him as he realized that one of his microphones must be nearby. That meant he was in one of the chambers he had mapped, but which one? The interface revealed no location data, just the active recording status. Against his better judgment, Daniel connected his headphones to the tablet, keeping one ear uncovered so he could remain aware of his surroundings. He tapped the playback button for the current recording. At first, there was nothing but cave ambiance. Then, faintly, footsteps. His own footsteps from moments ago, he realized. The microphone had captured his approach. Then came a whisper, so close it sounded like someone speaking directly into the microphone. "You're going the wrong way, Daniel." He yanked the headphone from his ear, spinning around with his flashlight. The beam illuminated only empty cave. The recording was still running. With trembling fingers, he disconnected the headphones and raised the tablet's volume, listening to the live feed from the microphone that had to be somewhere in this chamber. For several seconds, there was nothing but the sound of his own ragged breathing. Then, a low, rhythmic scraping, like something being dragged across stone. It was getting louder, closer. The microphone in his pack suddenly began picking up a transmission. Not wanting to stop, Daniel kept moving while he listened through one headphone. It was his voice again, future Daniel, engaged in conversation with himself? "Don't trust what you're hearing," his voice was saying. "It's using your own echoes against you. Every sound you make feeds it information." A second version of his voice responded, "How do I get out? Which way?" "Not the entrance. It's waiting there. You need to find the water passage. Follow the lower tunnel past Chamber A. There's a stream that leads to an exit." "How do you know this? Who are you?" "I'm you, from further ahead. Listen to me. It collects echoes. Every time you've spoken in this cave, every sound you've made, it's gathered them, learned from them. It's building a version of you made entirely of sound." The transmission cut off abruptly. Daniel stood frozen in the passage, his mind racing. Was this another manipulation? Or was it actually a warning from himself? The water passage wasn't on his map, but he knew that caves often had unmapped sections, especially those involving underwater areas. Chamber A wasn't far from here, and he knew exactly how to reach it. But the entrance was closer, and represented certain escape if he could reach it, unless something was waiting for him there. Daniel made his decision. He would go to Chamber A and look for the water passage mentioned in the transmission. It went against all wilderness survival protocols to venture into unmapped cave sections, but if something was indeed waiting at the main entrance, he needed an alternate route. He altered his course, following passages that would lead to Chamber A. As he moved deeper into the system, instead of toward the exit, a sense of wrongness crept over him. What if the transmission had been false, designed to lure him deeper into the cave? Too late to second-guess now. He had committed to this path. Chamber A appeared ahead, its familiar spherical shape a small comfort in the surrounding strangeness. Daniel swept his flashlight across the space, looking for any sign of a lower passage that might lead to water. There, on the far side, partially hidden behind a column of flowstone, was an opening he hadn't noticed during his initial setup. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to fit through, and sloped downward at a steep angle. Daniel approached cautiously, shining his light into the gap. The beam reflected off wet surfaces below, and he could hear the faint sound of running water. This had to be the passage mentioned in the transmission. Before entering, he switched on the microphone, recording what might be his final notes. This is Daniel Reeves, Day 3 at Hollow Mountain. If anyone finds this equipment, I've attempted to exit the cave system through an unmapped water passage beyond Chamber A. There is something in these caves. It manipulates sound, possibly time itself. The Echo X system has been receiving what appear to be transmissions from the future. I don't know if what I'm doing is right, but I'm running out of options. He hesitated, then added, "If you hear my voice anywhere in these caves after finding this recording, do not trust it. It's not me." Daniel squeezed through the narrow opening and began his descent into the unknown passage. The slope was treacherous, slick with moisture and occasionally crumbling under his weight. After about 50 feet of careful climbing, he reached a more level area where a small stream flowed through a channel in the cave floor. The passage continued alongside the stream, gradually widening as the water volume increased. Daniel followed it, hope growing as the sound of the water became louder, suggesting it might indeed lead to an exit. After 20 minutes of following the stream, the passage opened into a larger chamber with a pool where the water collected before continuing through another tunnel. The pool was clear and still, reflecting his flashlight beam like a mirror. As Daniel moved around the edge of the pool, his light revealed something on the far wall. More writing, scratched into the stone. His stomach dropped as he read the message. "This is not the way out, turn back, Daniel." That was his handwriting. But he had never been in this chamber before. Never written that message. The microphone in his pack began receiving another transmission. With shaking hands, Daniel raised it to listen. "Don't go into the water." His own voice again, but somehow different, flatter, with subtle distortions in the pronunciation. "It's waiting in the water. Go back to the entrance. It's safe now. I let it away." Daniel stared at the message on the wall, then at the still pool of water. Which was the trap? The water passage, or the suggestion to return to the entrance? The surface of the pool rippled slightly, though there was no breeze in the chamber. Daniel backed away from the edge, his instincts screaming danger. He had no way of knowing which path was safe, which voice to trust, the written warning or the transmitted one. Both appeared to come from himself. A third option occurred to him, the Grand Hall. It was massive enough that there might be other exits, passages not fully explored by the survey team. It would mean going deeper into the system, but perhaps that was better than choosing between two potentially deadly paths. Daniel exited the water chamber the way he had come, climbing back up to Chamber A. Rather than returning toward the entrance or continuing with the water route, he chose a third path that he knew would lead toward the Grand Hall. The journey was arduous, his flashlight beam weakening as the battery began to fail. He had a spare in his pack, but reaching it would require stopping and opening the sealed equipment bag. For now, he pressed on, following the passages from memory as best he could. The microphone had gone silent, no more transmissions coming through. Daniel wasn't sure if that was reassuring or more worrying. When his flashlight finally dimmed to a useless glow, he had no choice but to stop and retrieve his spare. As he rummaged through his pack in near darkness, his fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. A small digital voice recorder that wasn't his. He had never seen it before, yet here it was in his own equipment bag. The recorder had a sticky note attached that read simply, "Play me," in his own handwriting. Daniel found his spare flashlight and switched it on before examining the mysterious recorder more carefully. It was a standard model, the kind that could be purchased at any electronics store. The display showed a single audio file with today's date. His hand trembled as he pressed play. His own voice emerged from the speaker, sounding exhausted but urgent. "Daniel, this is you. I'm you. I know this makes no sense right now. Time doesn't work normally in these caves, especially not since you activated the Echo X system. Its frequencies have awakened something, stirred it up. It's been here for centuries, dormant until now. I've been trapped in here for what feels like weeks, though my watch only shows 3 days have passed. I've been leaving myself messages, trying to create a path out, but it keeps changing the cave, moving things, creating false passages. It feeds on sound, on echoes specifically, Every noise you make gives it more power, more understanding of you. It's been collecting all your recordings, all your words, building something from them. There is a way out, but it's counterintuitive. You need to go deeper. In the Grand Hall, there's a passage hidden behind the southeast column, the large one with the flat face. It looks like a dead end, but if you squeeze through the narrow crack at the base, it opens into a tunnel that eventually leads to the surface. I found it, but I couldn't make it through. My leg was already broken by then. Don't trust anything you hear, especially if it sounds like me. The only message from me you can trust is this recorder, which I'm going to find a way to place in your pack before you discover you've been moved from the entrance. And Daniel, make as little sound as possible. Every word you speak, it hears and learns from. It's building an echo of you, and once that echo is complete, it won't need the original anymore. The recording ended. Daniel stared at the device in his hand, mind reeling. How had this recorder gotten into his pack? The implications were staggering. It suggested that another version of himself, from some future point, had somehow traveled back to leave this message. But even if that impossible scenario were true, could he trust it? Or was this just another manipulation by whatever entity inhabited these caves? The Grand Hall was his destination either way. He would look for the passage mentioned in the recording, but remain vigilant for traps or deceptions. Moving as silently as possible, Daniel continued through the cave system. He kept the microphone turned on, but muted his end. If strange transmissions came through, he wanted to hear them, but he would no longer respond or record his own voice. The passages leading to the Grand Hall seemed different than he remembered, narrower in places, with new formations that forced him to detour. The cave was changing, just as the recorder had warned. When he finally reached the massive chamber, Daniel immediately noticed something wrong. The microphones he had placed were gone, removed from their stands. His flashlight beam searched the expansive darkness. Finally, locating one of the stands, bent and twisted as if crushed by immense force. Moving carefully along the perimeter, Daniel searched for the southeast column mentioned in the recording. The Grand Hall had dozens of massive columns, but as he circled the space, he identified one that matched the description. Larger than the others, with one face unnaturally flat, as if sliced by a giant blade. At its base, partly hidden by fallen debris, was a narrow crack. It looked impossibly tight, but when Daniel cleared away the debris, he found it was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they turned sideways. Before entering, he paused. What if this was another trap? The recorder could have been planted as a lure to this specific location. A sound from behind made the decision for him, the now familiar scraping and clicking, distant, but approaching. Whatever hunted him was entering the Grand Hall. Daniel switched off his flashlight and slipped into the crack, moving by touch alone through the narrow passage. The stone pressed against his chest and back, occasionally catching on his clothing. For one terrifying moment, he thought he was stuck, but a slight shift in position allowed him to squeeze past the tightest section. The passage expanded beyond the bottleneck, allowing him to move more freely. He risked turning his flashlight on its lowest setting, revealing a tunnel that sloped gradually upward, a good sign if he was seeking an exit to the surface. As he climbed, the air began to feel different, less stagnant, with a faint breeze that carried the scent of pine and earth. Hope surged within him. This might truly be an escape route. The tunnel continued upward for what seemed like hours, occasionally branching. Daniel always chose the path that sloped upward and followed the strengthening breeze. His watch showed he had been in the caves for nearly 60 hours now, approaching the end of his third day with minimal sleep and dwindling supplies. When he saw a faint glow ahead that wasn't from his flashlight, Daniel nearly sobbed with relief. Natural light. The exit had to be close. He emerged from the tunnel into a small ravine, the night sky visible as a strip of star-filled darkness above. The ravine walls were steep but climbable, with enough roots and outcroppings to serve as handholds. Daniel looked back at the cave opening, an unremarkable hole that would be easily missed if you weren't specifically searching for it. No wonder it wasn't on the survey maps. He began to climb toward the rim of the ravine, his exhausted muscles protesting every movement. When he finally pulled himself over the edge, he found he was on the opposite side of Hollow Mountain from where he had entered, at least 2 miles from the Research Foundation's property. In the distance, he could see lights from a highway, civilization, safety. The microphone in his pack suddenly activated, a transmission coming through with perfect clarity. "Congratulations, Daniel. You found your way out." His own voice, but with that subtle wrongness he had noticed before. "But I'm afraid your echoes remain. They're part of me now. And soon, I'll be ready to leave this cave too." The transmission ended with what could only be described as the sound of a smile, a shifting of breath and lips that conveyed cruel amusement. Daniel pulled out the microphone and smashed it against a rock, then did the same with the tablet. He wanted no connection to the Echo X system, no link to whatever remained in those caves. As he began the long walk toward the highway, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't escaped completely, that something had followed him out of Hollow Mountain. Not physically, perhaps, but in some other way. His voice, his sounds, his echoes remained in those caves, collected and repurposed by something ancient and patient. And the thought that kept returning to him, growing louder with each step, was simple and terrifying. What if it had collected enough to become him? 3 weeks later, Resonance Research Labs received a field report from Daniel Reeves, detailing the successful testing of the Echo X system in Hollow Mountain. The data was impeccable, the acoustic maps more detailed than anything they had ever seen. They immediately approved a second expedition, a larger team this time, with more equipment and a longer stay. When a colleague called Daniel to congratulate him on the report, he sounded exactly like himself on the phone. He spoke enthusiastically about returning to Hollow Mountain, about the discoveries waiting to be made in its depths. "The echoes there," he said, "are absolutely perfect." Meanwhile, in a psychiatric facility 200 miles away, a man who claimed to be Daniel Reeves was explaining, again, about the thing that lived in Hollow Mountain, about the way it collected sounds, built echoes, created versions of people made entirely of their own voices. No one believed him, of course, especially since the real Daniel Reeves was clearly fine, already preparing for his next expedition. The patient gazed out the window, his voice barely a whisper. "When the expedition team enters those caves, they'll never come out. Not the real versions, anyway." He closed his eyes, listening to the echoes in his mind of all the words he'd spoken in those caves, echoes that no longer belonged to him. It's learning, growing, and soon, it won't need the caves anymore. The end.